evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today is March 15th, 2023. I'm joined, as usual, by Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford. How are you, Nigel?
Good to be here. Having a great day.
Beauty. Also joined, as usual, by the Western Standard's senior Alberta columnist, Cory Morgan. How are you, Cory?
Very good, thanks.
We've got a great show today. We're going to be covering the ban from Calgary's mayor and council of certain kinds of protests. That's right. If you protest certain things that the municipal government here in Calgary deems to be overly offensive and not appropriate, you can face a $10,000 fine or up to 1 year in prison. It's going to be sure to launch a whole new industry of court challenges while people are facing these fines in the meantime. Now, we're going to take a bit of a turn into Alberta UCP nomination battles. Now, don't change the channel just yet. In a vast majority of constituencies, both across Canada and in Alberta and in other provinces, the real election is not on election day. It's in the nomination. Those votes, in some cases, votes in constituencies that decide who is the candidate for certain parties, because most constituencies are actually quite safe. It's only a handful in the middle that flip hands generally between elections. And it's very, very important. So we're going to be diving into some of the most important and high-profile nomination races for the United Conservative Party in Alberta today. And some of them are pretty damn interesting. It's also now been 3 years since lockdown started. And I know some of you are probably tired of talking about it. Some of you I know are definitely not. But it's been 3 years since most people in the world outside China had a normal life. We're pretty damn back to normal now, but it was 3 years ago, right around this time, that things started. So we're going to take a retrospective look. We're going to look at what were some of the harms, potential benefits. Some people benefited. You worked for the government. It was pretty good. Some people did benefit. Some people benefited quite a bit if you got the right kind of government contracts. But we're going to talk about what are the long-term effects, retrospective, now that we can look in hindsight. 3 years from when this all started. Before we get going, though, we've got to thank my favorite sponsor, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Yeah, I know, you've heard me say it before. I've been a CSSA member for well over a decade. But that's because I've trusted them this time to be my voice for gun rights in Canada. The CSSA is Canada's leading firearms rights organization. Without them, the federal government would have probably seized damn near everything by now, even my kids' BB guns. I just bought another gun yesterday, and I felt confident doing so, knowing that I've got an organization like the Canadian Shooting Sports Association that stands on guard for my right to responsibly and safely purchase, own, and use firearms in this country. So if you're not yet a member of the CSSA, go to cssa-cila.org, or do what I do, just Google them and become a member today. It's absolutely vital in the fight to stand up for your right to bear arms in Canada. All right. So we're going to dive into it here. Just the other day, Calgary City Council, led by the mayor, passed a new, quote, safe and inclusive access bylaw. So we have the story up from one of our reporters, Jonathan Bradley. This restricts protests objecting to or disapproving of, quote, race, religious beliefs, color, gender identity, gender expression, whatever the difference is between those, physical disability, mental disability, age, ancestry, place of origin, marital status, source of income, family status, or sexual orientation. And people would be banned from engaging in protests about these topics within 100 meters of an entrance to a community center or library. And if you don't listen to Mayor Gondek, you can face... you can face a maximum penalty of up to $10,000 fine or a year in prison. Hefty stuff. Where do you start on something like this? But there's been bylaws already passed by the Calgary Council, and then these things have a way of being contagious. One wacky city council does something, others are going to do it. So that's why we're talking. I know not everybody here is in Calgary. Majority of our viewers are, but we've got a lot of people in Calgary. But what happens in Calgary doesn't stay in Calgary. Just, Toronto does something wacky, Calgary normally follows soon after. But this is coming because there's been, I think, an increase in the number of protests, primarily aimed at drag events targeted towards minors, in some case, very, very young minors. We've talked about this before, but there's been an increase in these protests. I haven't seen any protests, I'm not saying there hasn't been, but I have not seen any protests of people protesting against races. No Irish. I haven't seen protests against color, no green. Gender, I haven't seen no women or no men. I haven't seen that. Gender identity. I haven't seen people protest against people's gender identity, whatever that is, or gender expression, whatever that is. We've seen people protest against subjecting young kids to kind of creepy drag shows, but I haven't seen people protesting against people expressing themselves however they want. Against physical disability. Are you allowed to protest against like Alzheimer's disease anymore?
Well, not now.
Down with Alzheimer's?
My weekend plans are done.
Yeah.
I never remember when I go after them anyway.
Mental disability. Age.
Kind of a demented thing to do, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Age. You're not allowed to protest against age. So, like, no old people. I don't know. Ancestry, place of origin. I haven't seen source of income.
That one got me.
Source of income. Are you allowed to protest against drug dealers? I suppose that would now be illegal. You're not allowed to protest against drug dealers. Sexual. I haven't seen people protesting against gay people or lesbians. I've just never. I mean, these things have happened in days of yore, but I just haven't seen these things. Let's start with you, Nigel. What do you think the danger is of this being applied haphazardly beyond how they probably intend it to be?
This is totally political. It's virtue signaling. We have a Charter of Rights that gives us freedom to protest. It's that simple. And if they charge somebody under this bylaw, my certainty, the way I would bet in any office pool constructed around that case, would be that it would be dismissed, because we do have the right to assemble, the right to free speech, and both of these are compromised by this bylaw. But I don't think that mattered to the people who wanted to put this through. They wanted to make a statement. They've made it. Why they would want to make that statement, I cannot imagine. You correctly listed all the things that this bylaw excludes you from protesting about. None of them happen except for that one thing where children are exposed to a drag show. Now, maybe it's a bit 19th century of me, but I just find that concept something that you should protest, something that is wrong. And when somebody does it, as long as they don't screw it up, as long as they make the facts of the case reasonable, they don't get into a struggle with a police officer or assault a drag performer with their sign as they enter the building or anything like that. As long as they make the facts reasonable, this will not hold up. This is unconstitutional. It's a public relations gesture. Why they want to make it, that's a political question maybe we should ask. But there it is. Won't hold up.
I'm not so confident it won't hold up in the courts. Our courts have a funny way of reinterpreting the Constitution to fit whatever the political sensibilities of the day are. But I would agree in principle to the way the Constitution's written, it's clearly unconstitutional. But that doesn't seem to really matter to a lot of judges.
You're right in one sense.
They want to make legal precedents in the books. They want to be cited.
You're right in one sense, but defending the right of grown men dressed up in women's clothes to expose themselves to children doesn't seem like something that a normal person would want to be associated with. Like, you wouldn't want that to be the case for which you as a judge are remembered. Mm-hmm. And certainly the public is not with you on it.
I don't know. So this has rings, Corey, of the bubble zone
I
law.
was thinking of just that. This is familiar turf for you.
Yeah. I'm inevitably going to have to toot my own horn a little bit. I'll try to keep it to an absolute bearable minimum. So we go back to 2019. The NDP provincially introduced so-called bubble zone law to make it illegal to protest outside of an abortion clinic. And for the most part, at least the way it's portrayed in Hollywood, those are kind of nasty protests. People are hurling insults at women and being generally nasty. Saying things I don't think are actually going to do the pro-life movement any good. But most of these protests actually tend to not be like that. They're very quiet. They might be someone handing out a pamphlet with alternatives to abortion. Sometimes it's a little.
Linda Gibbons silently praying outside there.
Yeah, but all of that was illegal, and the Notley government brought this in, trying to catch Jason Kenney because he was known as a pro-lifer, try to catch the UCP as scary social conservatives, and the UCP decided to abstain from voting, which you can't actually do under the rules. So they had to leave the legislature every time there was a vote on the law. They weren't counting on me putting forth, I think I put forth like 25 or 28 amendments to it. So it actually, they had to skip dozens and dozens of votes. It turned out to be kind of an embarrassing thing, but the UCP kind of cowardly ran away from it. They didn't want to talk about it. But this is kind of based on it. You're banning protests on a certain location around a topic. And which is one reason I'm not confident the courts will strike this down, because the courts have upheld that. But this is going another. That legislation didn't mention what you're protesting. It said you can't protest at an abortion clinic. Theoretically, you can't protest for abortion at an abortion clinic, although that doesn't really tend to happen. But you're not allowed. It was not about the topic; it was the location. So that seems to have withstood court challenges. But Cory, this is getting into the topic. You cannot protest on these topics. It's taking the legislation is very clear on what you can be for and what you can't be for. I don't know. Do you think this? You're not a lawyer, but in your view, do you think this stands any chance of standing up in a court, or is this purely going to be just symbolic? It gets struck down and we move on.
Well, I'm kind of with you. I think I'm with Nigel in that it shouldn't stand up in court. It's just clearly unconstitutional, but I think it will. We'll see. Depends on who the first one charged is and what they've done.
Well, that's what I say. You got to make sure the facts.
You got Larry Heather in there, who's kind of a perennial, chronic social conservative protester who can get pretty hysteric. It makes it hard defensively, in front of the court. Again, people should say, well, you should be charged then for crossing lines of intimidating people or blocking access or things. But yeah, this was virtue signaling. I mean, the language in the city hall from Courtney Walcott when he said, and as if I were another counselor, I'd be outraged. Is anybody who votes against this supports hate. That's what he said, right outright. Yeah. Like, come on. And he's been known for his race baiting. I'll call him out on it because it's not conducive. There's real hateful people out there, but when you pull stunts like that, you just add to the division. You look at the protests outside of these, they're usually 10, 11 people. We're not talking about a big groundswell or a real problem. It's just a symbolic problem, and they're trying to swat it with a hammer.
It's obviously designed to send a message. And well, I guess they've done it, but I suppose it's not just the drag shows. There's the case of I'm trying to know what to call it. I'm calling it for now the whippersnapper, the biological male who identifies as a woman, who, according to multiple eyewitnesses to the Western Standard, was walking around the female change room at the Canyon Meadows public pool in southern Calgary, waving her penis around. Again. It's 2023 verbiage there. And there were protests against this. And the usual suspects have said people who are opposed to this, people who have reported it are hateful. The Western Standard's hateful for talking about this, but we've got, 4 or 5 eyewitnesses in person who saw the whippersnapper whipping around, doing his or her thing. And there was protests against this, and they're very angry about it. Nigel, do you think this will be successful in kind of tamping down these protests? Because they're facing pretty serious consequences now if they do it. $10,000 a year in prison. It's a pretty big price to pay for going out on Saturday and making yourself heard.
I think it's what it's more likely to do in the short term is discourage women from taking their daughters swimming in these municipally owned swimming pools, which is a great shame. I mean, it shouldn't have to be that the person who is offended is the one who suffers the withdrawal of privileges, and the person who is doing the offending, and it is offensive. I think it's important for us to say that here at the Western Standard, we're not taking a position that transgender people are wicked or evil. No. We are saying that community standards that have served us very well are not to be forfeited to accommodate transgender people who somehow want to create a moment.
And most don't even appear to be doing this. It does seem to be a small minority of a small minority that are going out of their way to, to do obscene things like the whippersnapper at the pool. Most
why should 1,000 people be inconvenienced, offended, or feel that they can't safely go to a swimming pool to accommodate the one person who wants to make a point by strolling around?
What you're saying now is essentially a hate crime in Calgary. If you were to express that view within 100 meters
of the swimming pool in question. Yes.
I'm wondering if maybe we should test this bylaw ourselves.
I'm not testing.
Okay. You have a way with words that might not make for the best court case, Corey.
It's I heard an interesting thing, and I doubt the people who like protesting and making a lot of noise, the Larry Heathers and some of the others, will be satisfied with changing tack. But it was an interesting approach at a event I'd gone to, and somebody asked the speaker about those issues at the libraries, anyways, not the pool. And he asked in the room, how many people here have been on the board of their local library? And not a single hand went up.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the positions that really, if you've got 12 people together and show up at a library AGM, you can take over the entire board and you will not have another drag show there ever again. So maybe they should redirect, though. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't have a bigger issue with the threats to public protest and things, but the protesters perhaps could do their cause a better favor as well by being less, loud and obnoxious.
I agree, but I'm also not sure it's reasonable to think that to exercise your right to free speech, you need to join such an exciting and esteemed group as your local library board. That's a lot of mental.
There's a reason the hands didn't go up to you.
I don't care if my local library was conducting satanic child sacrifice rituals. I'm not joining the board. I just can't bring myself to do it.
I think that might still be seen as a legitimate protest if you decided to take matters into your own hands. Satanic child sacrifices?
No, you cannot protest that. That is on religious grounds.
Well, there's an interesting thing here. When some of the rights that we actually really respect, like the right to free speech, have been won when people defied the law as it then was. I think particularly in our own industry of how the right to free speech was won back in 1834 by Joseph Howe. He was in breach of the law when he published. And he said, well, I'm publishing anyway because what I'm saying is true.
Joseph Howe and the Nova Scotia colonial legislature is a bit of backstory for this, but you are right.
Yeah. So, who knows where this will go.
Well, speaking of backstory, let's get into some real deep backstory here. So right now, Alberta is ramping up for a general election coming up. Was it May 27th?
29th.
May 29th.
Yes, sir.
That is taken down faster than most of us realize. But before the election is, in most constituencies, the real election, or in some cases, appointment. And that is where the parties nominate their candidates. Theoretically, it's normally a vote of the members in the constituency who are in good standing. The party vets some candidates, the people get to select. That's normally the way it works, more or less. And the party leaders will put their thumb on the scale a bit here and there, but sometimes it gets a bit more extreme. But these nomination battles matter because roughly 75% of the seats in any given jurisdiction, provincial, federal, whatever it is, between 60 and 75% of the seats, they're not up for play. Cyprus Medicine Hat is never voting NDP. The NDP could run Jesus Christ and the UCP could run the devil himself, and the UCP will still win the seat. And then Edmonton Strathcona, Rachel Notley's seat. The NDP could run, Stalin, and the UCP run Winston Churchill. The NDP are still going to win that seat right now. It's a safe seat, and that's the way generally a majority of seats are. Elections are sided in the middle. So the nominations are really, really important, especially if you live in those seats where your vote doesn't really matter anymore. That one party's going to win it one way or another. So we're going to kind of go through some of the most high-profile ones. Don't worry, we're not going through all 87. We're going to go through some of the more recent ones that have just been nominated or have had recent news and controversy. So let's just start with maybe the most controversial of them all, Rimbey Rocky Mountain House Sundry. So there you have Jason Nixon, first elected in 2015 as the Wild Rose, 2019 reelected as UCP, and he was Jason Kenney's right-hand man. He was Minister of Environment and, importantly, House Leader. He was kind of his hammer within the caucus to try and keep it in line, especially as unrest happened during lockdowns and vaccine mandates. He was kind of the muscle behind Kenney. And that led, as Jason Kenney became very unpopular, Jason Nixon, well, he was kind of on the ship. And the Kenney ship went down. But before the Kenney ship went down, the party opened the nomination really early and to have a nomination, and they disqualified a guy named Tim Hoven. Tim Hoven, rancher in the area, was essentially slandered by the party as a racist, even though there was no record of him saying anything racist or anything. But they just said, he's a racist. Sounded like kind of what the NDP would do here. And they disqualified him so that Jason Nixon became the candidate in a hyper-safe seat, about as safe a seat as you're going to get in Alberta. Federally, that seat used to be called Wild Rose. It's that damn safe. And disqualified him, so there was no vote. And the UCP members in that constituency were denied any chance to select who their candidate was. It was just who Jason Kenney picked. And there's been a lot of stuff in the background since. And the local members have overthrown the board, demanded a nomination, an actual vote. All of this has been denied. And now Tim Hoven has announced he is going to run as an independent in this right now. Last independent elected in Alberta was Ray Speaker. And that was the early 80s, before I was born. And he had been the deputy premier of the province, the finance minister, and de facto premier, actually, for quite a long time. And it was before they even had televised leaders' debates, when people actually cared who their local MLA was. Not since then has there been an independent elected. So with you, Nigel, is this a big deal?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a big deal because it illustrates the divide that remains in the UCP now.
But it's a big deal that he would run as an independent, because independents do not win in Alberta. I'm sorry, anyone who thinks you can win as an independent. You can't. It's just...
Well, that certainly is the historical experience. What Mr. Hoven might well illustrate by his unsuccessful attempt is just how badly divided the party is. If he pulls in 500 votes and everybody votes for Jason Nixon, well, I guess people are going to make this thing work. And those who we describe as Kenneyites march on. But if Mr. Hoven should gain substantial voter attraction, not win, but really make a hole in Mr. Nixon's majority, which he will win, well, I would have to say that the fight remains on, and that going forward, assuming that Danielle Smith wins, which I think is a reasonably safe assumption, that she's going to have to deal with this for the next 4 years. It's a bellwether.
But there's just no way the UCP doesn't win that constituency. Even if the UCP candidate doesn't have the support of the local UCP members, the people are going to vote for the blue signpost. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it works, unfortunately. It's just the way it works. If Nixon is the UCP candidate in the ballot, he's going to be the UCP MLA at the end of the day. How do you think, even if Hoven gets a respectable showing as an independent, 5 or 10% would be, 5% exceeds the vast majority of independents. Most independents be able to break 1. How do you think Smith, maybe a two-part question. How do you think Smith should deal with this now? How do you think she deals with it post-election when Nixon inevitably takes the riding under the UCP banner?
Yeah, I don't know. I think she should have opened that nomination up right early and just bite the bullet. And yes, Jason Nixon might have lost it, but now he's that symbol that's there. I mean, it would have been behind her and out of the way.
But she was facing a significant revolt.
Well, the caucus was upset.
Caucus was worried that, well, what about if you open up his nomenation, my nomenation might get opened, and there's all these grassroots groups like TDA out there who are scary and taking out nominations.
These are tough choices. This division, that's what kills conservatives, kills them. And sure, you're right. There's no way Hoven's going to win as an independent. But he could build the base that now you're going to have 4 more years of battles going on in there. How to deal with it? Yeah, I don't know. That's why I'm in here and not in the legislature. She's got some very difficult rifts to heal there. And Nixon is just, he's a walking, breathing symbol of Kenney walking around her caucus right now that she's going to have to deal with down the road, if not sooner. And we'll see where Mr. Hoven goes. I mean, he apparently had sold over 1,000 memberships, when trying to win that nomination before. Again, he won't win the race, but as Nigel said, he could take a very strong symbolic bite out of it that make them realize like you've really got something to worry about. So I guess the only advice I could offer then, if it's Jason Nixon still in there after the election, is Danielle Smith has got to figure out how to heal that rift and turn it into a unified party, because there's going to be more fighting to come.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's turn to a very symbolic riding, Calgary Lahey. So this it's symbolic for a few reasons. It's named after Peter Lahey, who I think represented at one point, and it had another premier representing it until very recently, Jason Kenney. He won in the by-election there in 2017, and then represented since the last general election. He resigned, so that obviously opens up. There's no incumbent there. UCP had to nominate a candidate. Now, a guy named Eric Bouchard won just the other day, 53% of the vote in a 5-way race. So a good number of candidates. And he is, I think it's fair to say from the profiling we've seen by the likes of Linda Slobodian of him, pretty much an anti-Kenney candidate. He comes from the more libertarian populist wing, hardcore anti-lockdown. He was a business owner who felt that Kenney's lockdowns and mandates devastated his business and others. And at least as Bouchard tells it, he was organizing other business owners who were angry at Kenney for this and managed to win. I don't know, we'll start with you, Cory. How significant is it that like an anti-Kenney candidate is now the UCP candidate of the party Kenney more or less founded in Kenney's own constituency?
That's hard to say. I think he was better organized. I mean, from what I read too, he was just shy of winning on a first ballot, actually, with 5 other contenders.
They seem to all be more clustered together. They were voting for the other guy, so it took a few ballots from the win.
To pull that extra few percent, there was him versus the rest.
Yeah.
So there was the anti-Kenney and the Kenney, but it was close. And again, it illustrates some ongoing, perhaps a bit of division going on. But as far as the public notices, it's not the case of him knocking off an incumbent like we were talking about with Nixon. There's not going to be quite the hard feelings or the symbolism of how much that necessarily means. To wonks like us, we can read in and see that we're getting some non-conventional candidates winning these nominations that we wouldn't have thought before. But whether or not that bodes bigger division later on, I don't know if we could read too much into that.
Nigel, Kenney was famous, if nothing else, for being a great organizer. I mean, even his greatest detractors don't take that away from him. He was a machine politician. He could organize better than anyone else. And no doubt he had his own organization in Calgary Lahey. He used it as his constituency association as the base for his the campaign for him to keep the UCP leadership. They were, all the calls and stuff would be paid for by his local CA going out in support of keeping him as leader. But what does it say that Kenney's organization would seemingly be unable to hold the UCP nomination in Kenney's own seat?
Well, there are 2 things that it could possibly say. One is that the organization wasn't trying. That's possible. The other is that there has been a genuine groundswell going with the new premier. And Bouchard says he's never met Danielle Smith, but he says he's a big supporter of Danielle Smith. Perhaps that's an indication of just where public sentiment is in the politically interested in Calgary Lahey. And I qualify that by saying the politically interested because, to my observation, in rural areas such as we were just talking about, Rimby with Jason Nixon, people are a lot more interested in who their MLA is. They tend to just be more aware of those people. Mm-hmm. Whereas in a downtown riding, a downtown constituency, they're
fairly party.
Busy, going to work, getting on with it, going to the grocery stores. Oh yeah, somebody knocking on the door. Is it the NDP? No, it's all right. Yeah, tell them we're with them. And that's about as much as it gets. So it may not indicate terribly much about the feelings in the constituency, but it does tell you something about the feelings within the party in that constituency. But clearly, they are not backing anybody who rides on Mr. Kenny's coattails.
So we're going to switch now to Lacombe-Ponoka. So, just a bit north of Red Deer, rural and small urban constituency in central Alberta. There it was at least portrayed, I think fairly, as kind of a showdown between the Smithites and the Kennyites. You had Jennifer Johnson representing kind of the populist insurgent wing, and Dusty Marshall, who, at least as it's been written, I don't know the individual, coming more from the Kenneyite faction, and Jennifer Johnson beating Marshall there. And this is replacing Ron Orr, the current MLA, who's not seeking re-election, who I think Kenny had as Minister of Culture and maybe women's issues.
A couple little associates positions.
But it's a safe riding. The UCP nominee in this riding is going to be the UCP MLA in that riding, no doubt. I don't know. Do you guys have any insights into this riding?
I don't have direct insights.
No. I did do a brief tabletop interview with Miss Johnson here about 6 months ago, and she described very much the same.
Oh, I should say Johnson beat Marshall.
Yep. I think that was clear.
Okay.
She described very much the same kind of feelings within the people who were interested in politics in the constituency that you described with Rimby, Rocky Mountain House, Sundre. I mean, they were worried that the party was taking too much interest in the nomination process. But she stuck it out. I mean, she's a very credible individual. You meet her, you think, oh yeah, well, this one will do well, and so I guess she did. Mr. Marshall, I have not met, have not interviewed. Just reading his campaign material, he seemed like a sensible guy. But
I should note in almost all of these, not necessarily all, but most of them, especially in safe or winnable UCP seats, it's also not been a battle just between candidates and factions, but between political action committees, PACs. And that's going behind the scenes. And it's only now starting to get a little bit of mention in the legacy media. You've got Take Back Alberta on one side, and then a variety of other PACs. I won't name them so I don't get it wrong, but more PACs that had been affiliated with Kenny in the past and other kind of groups. And so there's money and organization on both sides. And they're kind of dueling out as almost, it's almost like these PACs are mini parties that have an election, have a nomination before the election. Then in the general election, well, whatever candidate is in there gets to carry it forward. But it's quite the series of proxy wars from top to bottom across Alberta.
It's interesting how some people sneer at PACs, and yet PACs are doing exactly what we were saying earlier.
They're getting
involved. To do with the library board. You don't like what the library's doing? We'll go on the board and see what you can do about it. Well, somebody said, I don't like what's going on in the UCP. We got to get things changed, but let's call it Take Back Alberta, And what did they do? They won 9 seats on the executive branch there at the big AGM. So, you don't have to agree with them, but at least they're putting their money where their mouth is.
On both sides.
Yeah.
And they're changing focus. It used to be PACs. Okay, we got a PAC, we got a big war chest. We're going to buy a whole bunch of third-party advertising or do other stuff.
They should buy a bunch of
or run polls, and they should. But the amount of impact versus when suddenly, particularly when it turned with Take Back Alberta, well, you know what? We're going to focus on these micro races, not the general election, and we're going to win these things bite by bite. And the other PACs have responded.
In most cases, that's the real election.
And absolutely, it's interesting to watch. It does make me nervous, as I said, with Conservatives. How bent out of shape are the losing candidates going to be? Because that's that risk that, say, Danielle Smith wins, but with a reduced majority. And suddenly you get 5 people across the floor, form a new party, and off to the races. Here we are with Conservatives splitting apart again. We'll just see, but there's definitely still some stew.
So we'll move on to one that I don't think is as much of a proxy battle. We have to give a clear disclosure here of a massive conflict of interest on this one. Cyprus Medicine Hat, where James Finkbeiner is fighting against Justin Wright for the UCP nomination there. Conflict of interest because James Finkbeiner is the former director of operations for the Western Standard. Now, it was not an editorial position behind the camera, behind the pages, but running a large part of the business and day-to-day functions of the Standard here. So a friend of the Standard. So clear disclosure of conflict of interest. You know, if I lived in Cyprus, Minnesota, I might vote for James, but I don't, and we're just going to try and take more of a, as much as we can, a clear-eyed analysis of it. Finkbeiner, we know, is a big Smith fan. Justin Wright, I think, is more of from the kind of older member among the constituency association board, local businessman, but it's a big fight, and it's guaranteed whoever is the candidate in this riding is going to be the MLA. Potential independent challenge. This is currently represented by Drew Barnes. Drew Barnes, you'll remember, was kicked out of the UCP caucus for, they didn't really name what, just being a pain in the ass to Jason Kenney.
Just being Drew.
Drew just being Drew.
I like Drew, but we were talking earlier. He's just hard to work with.
He can be difficult to work with, but generally takes the right side on issues, but sometimes difficult to work with, maybe. He said he wasn't running for the UCP nomination there. And remember, he didn't come back into the UCP caucus when Todd Lowen did. And Todd Lowen was kicked out for a very specific reason, saying Kenney should resign. But it's an interesting two maybe plus race there. It's, again, we know the NDP is on the ballot, but we don't take them seriously in this riding. I don't know, like maybe you, Nigel. Is this going to be an interesting riding to watch, or is it just going to be?
Well, I think we'll find it interesting to watch for all the reasons you've just given. But I mean, there's one other contrast between the two candidates that you didn't touch on. My understanding is that Justin Wright is part of a family that has lived in that area for generations, 2 or 3 anyway, and therefore is very well known and has a lot of personal loyalties around there. He is a businessman. He's known in the area.
Well, James was born and raised there as well. He's always talking about weird times in Redcliffe, things people in Redcliffe do.
Well, it'll be interesting to see who's what weight to put on local experience down there.
I won't get into it. I'll just keep it very general. But I'm privy to some of the things that have been happening in that campaign. Very whisper campaigns, nasty, quasi-hateful things that are not published in the newspapers, but they're whispered around in phone calls and at the coffee shop. And it's really nasty stuff. And it's the kind of thing you often see in local constituency level party politics. You probably know what the kind of thing I'm talking about, Corey.
I've heard some of the things already.
Yeah, it's nasty stuff. But how significant a role can the kind of whisper campaign play in a race like this? Because it's not in the newspapers. Yeah. Because no one, I doubt anyone would put their name to it in the paper.
It makes it personal. And if it is tied directly to another campaign rather than a campaign support, whoever wins afterwards, you could end up with a very divided constituency with at least the group of people who would have been your supporters and campaigners in the general election. As you said, it's not in the papers. General people don't know it. But internal party things, and with that one being such a weird hornet's nest, if Drew decides to run again, as an independent, his odds are really slim. But as an incumbent, he's going to take a good bite. And if you've got a group of the UCP that are really out of joint going suddenly behind Barnes, you might see something unusual happen. I watched, actually, because there wasn't much else going on that night that I saw it pop up, but I watched the candidate debate between Justin and James. And, it was a typical nomination one, pretty dull for the most part. But I did see a bit of a theme, at least a difference between the two. James is not really a hardcore social conservative by those measures, and Justin seems to be kind of trying to collect the social right together, and that's one of the areas where conservatives love to divide themselves up a bit as well. So, I mean, it can harm the party level organization if you get those rumors. I hope they don't cut too deep with it. That's all. Yeah, we're going to find out tomorrow.
That kind of stuff could be pretty nasty at the right now. Well, we won't get into it here because it's mostly defamatory stuff.
You said tomorrow's the day?
That's the day for theirs. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure we're watching that. Another riding didn't have a nomination because not many people want it. Edmonton Whitemud. Now, in 2012, this was the safest PC seat in Alberta when Alison Redford won. But remember, a lot of the left switched to vote PC in that election to stop Wildrose. Edmonton Whitemud. And oh boy, what an interesting candidate. Former Liberal Party of Alberta leader Raj Sherman. the Shermanator. Now, to be fair, Ross Sherman was actually a PCMLA originally. I'm not sure if was he under Klein at all or just under Stelmach.
I think he was just under Stelmach, but it could be wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know he was at least there in 2008 when Stelmach won. I'm not sure if he was there previously, all at the end of Klein. But he's always been an interesting guy. Anyone will agree about that with Raj. He's interesting. I like Raj. He's a fun and personable guy. You know, bit to my left, but he was the Liberal leader in 2012 and stepped down as Liberal leader like 5 minutes before the 2015 election. But it was in a seat. But he's high profile. He tried to run for the UCP leadership. The party disqualified him without really saying why. I mean, I'm not inclined to vote for people who have ever been Liberals, but I mean, hey, Jason Kenney was a Liberal at one point. He wasn't allowed to run for the Conservative leadership. He had no chance of winning. I don't know why they disqualified him, but he kind of kept on trucking anyway. He had a deckled out van. You could see
he wrapped his whole truck and everything.
He wrapped his truck. Yeah, his truck. He had a campaign wrapped around his truck. Even after he was disqualified, he's like, I don't care. And he just kept on campaigning for the leadership anyway. I kind of liked his charge at the enemy style, even in a hail of arrows. I don't know. He's high profile. He was the Liberal leader. He's won an Edmonton seat before. It's not the same seat. He's running in a seat on the outside that's a more conservative place at Edmonton, but the NDP is so damn strong in that city. Do you think the Shermanator's got any chance?
I don't know. I like the way you put it as a charge because he makes me think of Don Quixote almost. I mean, he's a bit of a character. He's kind of in his own world. Raj is going to do what Raj is going to do. It was a cannon fodder riding. The worst thing that could happen in White Mud is that he'd lose. I mean, the UCP wasn't going to take it any other way. And he does have some history there. And who knows? Maybe he'll galvanize voters. I think it's a pretty long shot, but he'll make what would have been a pretty boring Edmonton election interesting, I'm sure, because Raj is just Raj.
You're saying all those old Liberals are going to come out and support him now, right?
Well, I don't know, but he would engage people you wouldn't expect. I mean, he's a colorful, attention-grabbing individual. So.
Yeah. Maybe we'll go to this is the last one here, Nigel. Grand Prairie Wapiti. I'm not sure if they've had a nomination there yet or not, but
they haven't, because Travis Daves still hasn't.
He hasn't decided
whether he's going to run or not, as far as I know.
So Travis Daves, finance minister, he ran to succeed Jason Kenney. Largely carried the Kenney banner into that leadership race, kind of the Kenney establishment candidate. But conducted himself pretty well, but obviously did not catch fire, did not win. Smith kept him on as finance minister, but it's pretty strongly suspected that he's not going to run yet, but he hasn't said. Over under, is Travis Daves running or not? Or are we going to have a UCP nomination in that riding?
I'm just waiting for him to tell us. I mean,
so you think he's not running?
I have not. I have no idea. That's one area where I just do not have a good plug-in. My hope is that he would, because in my view, Travis Daves has done a very credible job as finance minister, and if he would go on doing it, it's bench strength for this government. If they win in May, then there's a place for Mr. Daves. But politics is tough. Maybe he's had enough. Mm-hmm. Taking his big throw didn't work. 2 months though, leaving it a bit late to say.
It is getting pretty late, for a new candidate to come in. It's a safe seat.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we were going to talk about 3 years in the rearview mirror for lockdown, but we spent longer actually on the UCP nominations section than I thought. And we can't really breeze through a 3-year retrospective of 3 years since the first lockdowns and mandates and whatnot. So we're going to put that one on the back burner. Maybe we get to it next week, depending on what happens in the meantime. But yeah, I think we're going to have to scratch that one.
Tell you what, though, there is an excellent article from in today's Western Standard, which does have a retrospective on that, and good reason to check in and
John Carpe.
Yes,
John Carpe put in a column on this. Fantastic. We're largely going to rehash his column anyway. Probably weren't going to do much better than John's own words anyway. So yeah, I'd strongly encourage everyone to go to the westernstandard.news and read Carpe's column. You can see it right in the opinion section.
I'll tell you what, while we're pumping our own columnist, Linda Slobodian have a look at what she has to say about that whole situation with the Calgary City Council and their unconstitutional bylaw. Check her out.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Nigel, Cory, thank you very much for joining. And thank all of you for joining us this evening. It's been a real pleasure. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandard.news. Click on membership. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access to all Western Standard content. It's vital that people like you sign up and support the work we do. We do not accept federal government media bailouts. We need people like you to sign up and support us voluntarily with your own money. That's it. That's all. Thank you very much. Have a good evening and God bless.
The current Lethbridge feed grain prices are as follows. Cash barley is at $4.17, feed wheat is at $4.25, and corn is down $2 at $417 per ton. In the milling wheat markets, Maine Minneapolis futures added 1.5 cents at $8.51, with local hard red spring bid for April movement at $10.91 per bushel. In the oilseeds, nearby canola futures are softer $3.40 at $754.20 per ton, with delivered values for April movement at $17.10 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentil prices are trading at 32.5 cents per pound. Yellow peas remain at $12.50 per bushel. In the cattle markets, April live cattle are down 1.5 cents at $161.90 per hundredweight. I'm David Lee at Marketplace Commodities, accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year.